Hi guys, welcome back to another episode of Sin and Tonic. Today's story is that of Mary Farmer, also known as the Watertown Trunk Murder. This one is an oldie but a spicy, so let's go. Sin and Tonic! Hi guys, hope you're okay. Hope you've had a wonderful weekend. There is a situation, I'm just going to let you know before I begin, where the offence panel has come down in the winds. So every now and then you're going to hear like a creak because it is down. I can't move it and it keeps making a funny noise against the side of the shed. It's probably going to make me jump because it's like intermittent, so it's probably going to make me crap my pants. Anyway, without further ado, let's dive on in. Like I said, this is an oldie. We are going to the 23rd of April in 1908. Stick with me though, because it is unbelievable. Patrick Brennan and Sarah Brennan, married, they lived in a property and their neighbours to that property were Mary Farmer and James Farmer. On the 23rd of April 1908, Patrick is coming home from a long day working at Remington Mill. When he gets home, he reaches up above the door frame for their door key, and it's not there. So this wasn't that much of a surprise because Patrick and Sarah had been having arguments and fighting. So he just thought, oh, she's locked me out. Terrible, really. But key wasn't there. Not to worry, because in the shed out the back, he kept another spare key. Maybe this has happened before. It is a bit spicy, isn't it? Like, oh, we're fighting, I'll lock you out. So he goes to the shed to get the other spare key, the spare key, and lo and behold, that is not there either. During this experience, he's noticed that James, his neighbour, is like milling around and they've had a wave or what have you. But James was a bit off because Patrick had waved, acknowledged, his existence, hi there, whatever, being polite, neighbourly. And James had not waved back and he was just sort of being there a bit stern. When he then came out of the shed, he went to the front door and he just knocked on the door because he was like, well, I am actually literally locked out now because there's no key. So he's knocking on the door and he was a bit confused, thinking, I knew we were fighting, but I didn't realise that, she was going to take it this far and she's properly locked me out of my house. But there was no answer, and it was a bit odd. She really must have been really cross. But there was still no answer. She wasn't answering the door. She was obviously being very stubborn. So then Patrick realised that there was a window at the back of the house that didn't latch properly and it was broken. So he went round to the shed to get his ladder because he thought, well, I'll just break into my own freaking house then. Come on, like, she's crazy. So that was his plan. He goes round to the shed to get his ladder. When he does that, when he's removing the ladder from the shed, James, his neighbour, comes over to talk to him. And this is when it gets spicy. First of all, James took Patrick to one side and just said, she's gone. Sarah has gone. She's left you. She's had enough. And she's gone away to go and stay with relatives. And she's told us that she's not going to be coming back. This whole conversation was not that unusual in itself because even though they were neighbours, they had actually become quite close over the time that they had all lived together next to each other. So for Sarah to have confided in their neighbours and tell them that they were having marital problems and that she was going and staying, all of that stuff was completely plausible because, like I said, they'd become quite close. This was obviously still a shock to Patrick because he knew they were fighting, but I don't think you ever expect your partner or your wife to just actually up and leave. Also, James had said, she's never coming back. And it all felt a bit like it was quite dramatic. It was quite final. So poor Patrick. But then came the real clincher, the real what moment? Because then James divulged that in the previous months leading up to now, Sarah had confided in them quite a lot and said how unhappy she was in their marriage and how she needed things to change and she needed a new life and needed a fresh start. And she had actually sold their house, their marital home, to the farmers, rendering poor Patrick homeless. Wow. Your wife's left and we own the house now, so bye-bye. Literally, it was like that. They didn't have any niceties like, oh, you can stay or you can rent the house from us or any of that business. No. Patrick had to, off you go. He was out on his ear. He had to go and stay in the local inn. Can you imagine the confusion and the just like, what the hellery of all of that? Like, that's bonkers, isn't it? I just feel, poor Patrick. He didn't just go to the inn. He had questions, obviously. He was quite cross. He asked James, why didn't you tell me this? Why did you and Mary not think to confide or talk to me about the fact that my wife was just going to sell our house behind my back? Valid, because they're his friends as well. Why did you go ahead with this? How could you? Also, he started to question whether it was legitimate. Like, has she just said that you can have the house? Like, he didn't know what the hell was going on. So he said to James, I need proof. I want proof that this is no longer my house. I need to know for a fact that you now own my freaking house. I'm getting angry on his behalf. Can you imagine? Like, what? James was kind of shady. He was like, there's a copy of the, what's it called? Like the deeds. So they just, I think back then, it was a long time ago, so it's probably very different. Like there probably wasn't as much, isn't it an absolute ball ache trying to sell a house? So much paperwork. You have to go through this and that and the solicitors and the who and the how and the what and how, all of that business. Whereas I think back then, I think it was much more simple and they signed the deeds over, I believe. Patrick left, he went to the inn. He started writing letters to Sarah's family to see whether she was with any of them. So difficult because it wasn't easy to just get in touch with people then. So that's what he did. He just was desperate to find information out about Sarah, where she was, who she'd gone to stay with. Like, he found it very unlikely that she would have just gone off on her own. During this time, he went back to his house and to the farmers numerous times to just say, well, I think he was very confused, as you can imagine. And obviously, James and Mary have more information than he does. They've been talking to Sarah a lot by the sound. I mean, she sold their freaking house to them. So they've obviously had conversation. Where is she? He thought that they would definitely know where she was and that they just weren't telling him. So he kept going back. Like, please, you must know where she is, what's going on. And eventually they served him an eviction notice and said that he was no longer allowed to go near the property. Basically, go away. Stop asking us questions. Very cold. Poor man. Patrick started to gather himself and started to think more clearly. So he then got himself, sorry, it's squeaking away. He then got himself an attorney and legal counsel, basically. What the fuck? Floyd Carlisle, what a name. This guy was, like, he specialised in property law. So just the guy that Patrick needs. Floyd asked Patrick for a description of Sarah, which obviously Patrick gave, and the first port of call for Floyd was that he went down to the office where the deeds would have been signed and handed over, and everything looked legitimate. Everything looked like Sarah had literally walked in there and signed the deeds over to the farmers. However, when back in the day, 1908, they would take a description. Again, because there's no like photo ID and stuff. It's crazy, isn't it? So they took a description of the person that came in, and the description did not match Sarah Brennan at all. So this is where it started to get fishy. Basically, it sounded very much like Sarah Brennan herself had not actually gone in to sign the deed over. Floyd took the deed to Patrick at the inn and showed him the description. And Patrick said, that is not Sarah. That is definitely not Sarah, but it sounds incredibly like my neighbour, Mary Farmer. And then the puzzle pieces started to fall together because Every time Patrick had returned to the farmers in the days after being kicked out of his home, they had always given him a slightly different story about where Sarah had gone, who she said she was staying with. One minute she was in one place and another thing, and it was all different every time he spoke to them. So it was just quite confusing. And also, why would you do that? Why would you not just have a story and stick to it? Like, well done. Anyhow, suspicion is now arisen. Another thing to note is that Patrick and Sarah had been married for 25 years. They were fighting, but they were in love. They did love each other. In Patrick's mind, this was just something that would blow over. They would sort it out. They would recover from this. And they had never kept secrets from one another. And it was just basically, it was out of character. And you would like to think after 25 years of marriage that you do know somebody. But to be fair, I have covered some cases where it boggles the mind. Patrick and Carlisle, they decide that they need to take it further. So they speak to a court attorney called Mr. Pitcher, and they end up getting the police involved as well. And they decide on a course of action, and that is that they need to go to the Brennan's house, which is now the farmer's house, and have a little nosy about and just see if there's any evidence or anything to suggest where Sarah has gone. The following day, Patrick and the police, they go to his old residence and they find Mary and James. I keep wanting to say Mary and Joseph. No, Mary and James moving in. They're like in the process of moving in. No shit's given. They're moving in. And the police inform them that they're going to look around the property and search is the word I'm looking for. Search the property because they're concerned about the whereabouts of Sarah Brennan. Important to note, James was absolutely fine with this. He was like, okay, have a look around, do whatever you need to do. Mary, on the other hand, not so much. Bit squirrely. The first thing that they all noticed that was very unusual was that Sarah's belongings were still there. They were still at the house. Her clothes, luggage, like everything was there. It did not look like for 1 minute Sarah had packed her stuff and gone. It was all there. So that's really worrying. Everything seemed normal other than the fact that her things were still there. However, a police officer or sergeant, some of this is a little bit, there's conflicting. I've read a couple of different things because it was such an old case, I think. A police officer or a sergeant found a trunk, a heavy trunk. In one source that I read, it said it was in an upstairs room, and in another it says it was at the back of the kitchen. So I'm not sure which, but they found this heavy trunk and it was locked. So the police officer or sergeant asked the farmers for the key to unlock this trunk because as they got near to the trunk, it had a very odd smell. The farmers said they'd lost the key a long time ago and didn't know what was in the trunk, had no idea. Good one. The police then used either an axe or a hammer to force open the lock on the trunk. And when they opened it, it was just a very grisly, horrible discovery. The body of Sarah Brennan had been shoved into the trunk, and it was just a very grisly sight to behold, with bits and sticking in places that they shouldn't be. Her head had been, basically, her body was very mutilated. Patrick and James were sat next to each other when this was discovered, and Patrick said to James, "Did you do this? Did you do this to my wife?" And James said, "I swear," what did he say? And James replied, "As God is my witness, I did not." Once the trunk had been discovered and opened and Sarah's body found, Mary she was very pale, she panicked, and her first reaction was that she tried to say that James had committed the murder. Clearly, Sarah had been murdered. It was, this wasn't natural causes by any means. And then almost as quickly as she had tried to throw her husband under the bus. She then retracted that and said, it was me. And she confessed there and then. It all became just too much for her. She said that she had struck Sarah on the back of the head with an axe. And then, well, clearly not just that, but that's what her initial confession was. She actually said that she had felled Sarah with the axe and washed the axe and the blood spots afterwards from the floor. She claimed that Sarah had stepped to the parlour window and that she had then gone behind her and drove the axe against her head, saying, "There, damn you, I have done with you." Wow. The axe was found a few days later, hidden in the barn, in a little nook in the barn. I'm just going to read through what the autopsy showed. So, the body was examined by Coroner Charles E. Pierce and other physicians, and the left ear of the body had been hacked off. Yikes. There were 3 defence wounds on the left wrist. I don't know what it is with eyes and lips, man, but the lips had been cut straight through. The left jaw had been broken. There was a large gash across the forehead where the skull had been smashed. And what they determined was that she'd actually been hit in the side of her face first, or the side of her head, and then just blow upon blow had been inflicted upon her head and her face. So this wasn't in line with sneaking up on Sarah at all. It wasn't indicative of that. Is that the right word? I don't often use that word. I think so. James and Mary Farmer were arrested. On discovering the body, they were taken to jail, and Mary still had a baby, so she took her baby with her, young baby, infant. So what did Mary have to say for herself? James stayed quite quiet. Mary, on the other hand, said that she had come up with this plan to steal the house from her neighbours, and she knew where the spare key was. So one day she snuck in to the property. I mean, what possesses you? Why not? Oh, I don't know. She walked into the house with the key, and she knew where the deeds were because Sarah and her were close. They were talking, they spoke. It's a real betrayal. So she knew where the deeds to the house were, and she took them. And then she went to the office and she pretended to be Sarah and had the deeds signed over to her. Just is so brazen. Apparently then, this is her version of events, apparently then she waited a number of months to make sure that this wasn't contested, and it wasn't. But then she had the problem of how do you get 2 adult people, humans, people, out of their house when they believe that they own it, because she's, that's not going to go down well, is it? And it's all going to come out what she's done. So this is when she decided that she was going to murder Sarah, and she came up with her plan. This is like those cases, when it's normally a man starts having an affair with somebody and then they realise that I'm going to get found out soon, or, well, I want to be with that person, but this person is sort of in the way, and then they murder their wife or their partner or their girlfriend because they can't see another option. How about leave your wife? Leave your girlfriend. It's such a broken brain. How people get to these decisions, how they get there, it blows my mind. And this is a bit like with Mary. She was like, I want that house. I want a house. And she later on said that she wanted her child to grow up. I believe the deed was then placed in the baby's name. She wanted her son to come out of life. It was, how about work? Mary also said in her confession that Sarah had come round to her house and she wasn't feeling very well. She said that she would give anything if Mary would take that axe over there and bash her brains out or something of that description. And so Mary obliged. Good one. Sounds very much to me like Mary wanted something, she couldn't get it legitimately. She was like, oh, I tell you what, I could do this. Came up with this plan, didn't know how it was going to come to fruition, and then settled upon murdering Sarah, all because she wanted the house. I find it like, it's not yours. It's so entitled, isn't it? Like, I want that. I'm going to get that. I'm going to have that. I'm going to steal that. Cray cray. They found some things in the property. They found underneath a mattress there was like a bloodied coat. It had been washed, but there was bloodstains on it. They found bloodstains on the floor in the parlour, and in the bottom of the trunk there was quite a lot of blood, the trunk where they had found Sarah, and it had sort of pulled and it had actually come out of some of the bottom of the trunk. And it was heavy to move. So there was this whole thing where people were helping them to move, and other people like helped move that trunk. And people said that the people that helped, they stood up in court to say that Mary had actually been kind of getting them drunk. There was like jugs of ale and things like that. So it's thought that Mary was intoxicating the people helping her on purpose so that they wouldn't really, like, if something went wrong. They also said that Mary watched them the entire time. The entire time that people were moving the trunk, Mary was with them. So she never took her eyes off of that trunk. And I imagine like she probably knew she knew what was in it, but she probably suspected, she didn't want anything to like start leaking out or whatever. So she got them all drunk. Then they moved it. She also made them tie rope around it, I guess, so it didn't like fly open. She really had herself covered. Then it was placed down and it did start to leak. After the trunk was placed in what was the Brennan's house, she never left that house then. She didn't go back. She basically kept her eyes on that trunk the whole time. Freaking hell. It is so windy. In her trial, Mary and her defence team pleaded insanity. Of course they did. However, there were just a number of things that came up that were like, no. For one, when she was arrested and they were taken to jail, she had her baby with her, and one of the officers actually said to her, "Oh, I don't know how you were sleeping at night knowing that there was a corpse in the trunk in your house. Like, in your house, how the hell were you like sleeping knowing that dead body was there?" That was the gist of it. And she just made a really sort of cold, she smiled. She was quite she was a callous, cold, devious one. She smiled and was like, I slept just as well as I did before. And it just implied that she had no conscience and she wasn't remorseful and that she was with it. She wasn't like insane. She was just a cold-blooded killer. There was also damning evidence at the trial. Many neighbours had seen Sarah enter Mary's house and never leave, but they had seen Mary go back and forth between the houses that morning. They also had testimony from a girl called Edith, who was 12, and she had gone to Mary's house to look after the baby that day. And this is quite damning against James as well. It seems like, well, he pleaded ignorant to all of it. He was like, I had no idea what was going on. Whereas Edith said that at noon that day, the married couple, they argued and that he threw some keys at Mary and said, I don't want these keys. And Mary made a comment about, as if you don't, you might not want the keys, but I bet you're going to want some of the money. So it seems like he did know what had happened. And also, when Edith was looking after the baby, Mary was very careful to make sure that Edith never saw into the back parlour where she had murdered Sarah. And she kept the door closed. She was very careful when she went in and out of the room. And she said that that's what she was doing that day. That's why she needed Edith to look after the baby, because she needed to thoroughly clean the back room. So she kept going in the back room to clean it. After a 10-day trial, Mary's trial, the jury went away for 3 hours and they came back and they found her guilty of murdering Sarah, and she was given the death penalty. This would mean she was only the second woman at that time to be given the death penalty, and she was going to be executed in the electric chair and in New York. And then in James's trial, he went down a different route completely, because Mary, her defence was that she was insane, and they were like, no, thank you. James, on the other hand, his defence was that he had no idea. Just plead ignorant. He didn't know anything about it, and he wasn't there at the time of the murder. That might have been true, perhaps, but again, there was quite a lot of evidence to suggest that he did know about it. Whether he was there or not, I'm not sure. I don't think there was evidence for that. But he was saying he knew nothing of it. Not sure. He was incredibly. He did a really good acting job. If he did know, because it seemed at the time when they discovered Sarah's body, that he was genuinely quite disturbed, taken back. He couldn't believe it. I think he said something to Mary like, "Did you do this?" or something. But people are good at acting, aren't they? Especially if you're gonna. You might get the death penalty. So that was his defence, that he knew nothing of it. But the testimony from Edith saying that they'd had this row at lunchtime suggested that he did know. Perhaps he could have just been cross with her for something else, or the fact that she'd fraudulently, I don't know. There was also testimony that said that for a few months before Sarah's murder, he was showing off to people that he owned their house. And so that to me says that he definitely knew about the deed transfer, and that his wife had done this awful, well, it's fraud, isn't it? And stealing, has stolen their house from them. So that would suggest that he knew about that. James did have an alibi for the actual murder. So it's believed the murder took place at 9:30 in the morning. And James had gone to a friend's house called Doran at 20 to 9. And he was there at the time that the murder took place. However, again, the old nosy neighbours, they said that they had witnessed James coming home numerous times that day, which was unusual. Also, people just found it really unbelievable that he didn't question anything. That, like, how did Mary buy? He said that Mary had told him that she'd bought the house with some money that she'd been left by an uncle or some rubbish, and okay. And people just, they couldn't believe it. They were like, he must have been in on this. Whether he was there at the time of the murder or not, they believed he was in on the plan. He was in on, like, all of it. Like, he knew what was going on, but he was saying he did not. Again, the jury went away, they deliberated, they came back and they found him guilty, and he was also sentenced to death. Mary appealed her sentence immediately, and she kept on. She kept on and kept on and kept on. Every single time she appealed, she was denied, and her date of execution was set. This was for the 29th of March 1909, and she was the only female prisoner on death row, so she had to be placed in a cell where no male inmates could see her, and she had to have special female staff that were just for her. Her husband was not kept anywhere near her, so they couldn't communicate, they couldn't talk until near the end. Her attorney kept on pushing for life in prison, life in prison, life in prison, and it was just turned down at every single appeal. Before her execution, shortly before, she was given some time to spend with her husband, and apparently it was really awkward at first, and then they went on to say their goodbyes. Can you imagine? I mean, that's such a bizarre moment in time, isn't it? She also gave a note to her priest with a full written confession. She stood by the fact that James had absolutely nothing to do with it. She was gutted. She said, even when she was on the day that she went in to be executed, she said that she was just very, very sad that he was on death row because he had nothing to do with it. And this was all written down in her note. She had her head shaved because she was going to be electrocuted. And she was strapped into the chair at 6:05 p.m. and they then administered the electricity for 1 minute, but it wasn't successful. When they'd finished administering the electric, she sort of moaned and cried a bit, and then they realised that she was still alive, so they did another electrocution for a few seconds, and then the doctors checked her, and again she was still alive. It's just, They switched again, and this time she did die. Things never change, do they? The doctors tried to sort of tell the public that she had died after the first bout of electric. Why would you do it again if she was? Why would you do it 2 more times if she was? Because they wanted, oh no, she had died. We were just making sure. But it was not. People were like, yeah, all right, mate. Because Mary had then written her confession, and in her last words before she was executed, she said, he has nothing to do with this. I'm about to die, I'm telling you. That held a lot of weight. So then James had a retrial because of this on the back of her confession, basically. And it was then a different story, really. And he was found not guilty. So he went on to live, James, and work and have his life, basically. He carried on as he had before. I don't know what I think about it. My gut tells me that he knew about the murder, and I mean he came home multiple times that day. She had it's not a quick thing to dispose of and clean a room and all of that after you have murdered and then basically sort of dismembered and disfigured the body to get them into a trunk. So I think he knew. I think he did know. But I don't. Yeah. Whether he knew that that's what was going to happen before it happened, I'm not sure. Anyhow, the letter. I just wanted to read out her letter. So, to Rev J. Hickey. My husband, James D. Farmer, never had any hand in Sarah Brennan's death, nor never knew anything about it till the trunk was opened. I never told him anything what had happened. I feel he has been terribly wronged. James D. Farmer was not at home the day the affair happened. Neither did James D. Farmer ever put a hand on Sarah Brennan after her death. Again, I wish to say as strongly as I can that my husband, James D. Farmer, is entirely innocent of the death of Sarah Brennan, that he knowingly had no part in any plans that led to it, and that he knew nothing whatever about it. Signed, Mary H. Farmer. And then blah, blah, blah. So that was on the 28th of March, 1909. She says, I never told her what happened. I feel wrong. James D. Farmer was not at home the day the affair happened. He did come home, though. There are witnesses. So, different time, wasn't it? Different time, but, there was evidence that he was home that day. Maybe not at the time of the murder, but he was home on that day multiple times. So I call BS, Mary. Anyhow, that is all I have for you on today's case. I don't often do really old cases because sometimes when a long time has passed, there's not as much evidence and things can be over all of those years, like lost and described differently in different places. But there was quite a lot of stuff to research on this case, and things had been noted down. I suppose it's not that some cases that I've looked at are like in the 1883 I looked at the other day or something, or maybe even earlier than that. And records and stuff have been kept, but someone asked the other day in a comment if I do historical cases, and a lot of them I do find genuinely interesting, and it still boggles the mind how, like in this case, we're still people, but I suppose it is different, isn't it? Different times, things were so different. It still interests me though. There just has to be enough research and sort of things that back up what's gone on, otherwise it feels like I'd just be telling a tale, maybe. This one felt like there was a lot of stuff and a lot of things that all supported each other, other than a few details which I found interesting, like where the trunk was found. Was it there? Anyhow, that is bound to happen with old cases. It did capture me though, that case. Just the unbelievable nature of people. Why does it always surprise me? I hope you've all had a lovely weekend. It feels so lovely to be back with you today. I'm really excited, can you tell, about the 2 videos a week? I'm just like buzzing. Yes. Yeah, I'm really happy. It's made me really happy bunny. I wish that fence would stop banging. Also, it's not cheap, is it? Replacing fence panels. Every bang, £1, £2, £3. Like, just, yep, I know. It's bad enough that I've got to go and spend hundreds of pounds on my tooth tomorrow. I had a root canal years ago. The tooth has started to sort of, well, basically crumble. I brushed my teeth one day, a while ago, and it was like one of those dreams, you know, when you dream and all your teeth fall out. I was brushing my teeth, and I was like, what? And my two parts of my tooth, back molar, just came clean out. There's no pain because I have no root. There's no nerve. But still, that was shocking. And then saw the lovely dentist. He made me, like, built up the areas and did some magic. And then 3 nights ago, I some of it came out again. Long story short, some of my tooth fell out. This time I don't think it'll be such an easy fix. Part of me just wants them to take the tooth out, but because there's a root canal, that can cause, like, I might have to go into a hospital to have the cement removed as well, you know, like where they filled in the root, all of this business. Just one tiny little tooth, well, it's not that small, but you know what I mean, causing me stress, time. I'm going to have to go in multiple times for this one tooth, and money. At the least, we're talking a couple of £100 for a tooth. That's it. Even if they just want to remove it, I just find that hard to swallow. Pun not intended. Luckily, I haven't swallowed any. So anyway, yeah, that's my debacle with my tooth. What are you going to do? Anyway, lovely to be with you today. I hope you have a wonderful week ahead, and I will see you all on Friday. Yeah. Okay, love you.